understand
Oh,
too.
well, it was
The
embarrassing.
beginnings of it. They would rather cover it up. It's the face, I understand.
Oh, could you pass me a book, please?
Which one?
Chumash?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Das Buch.
Das Buch is German for the Bible.
Uh-huh.
Oh.
What is it?
The Bible means the book in Greek.
Uh-huh.
Yes?
Family.
Bibliography, biblioteca.
Oh, it says ordinance.
Bible means book. This is it's an idea that I feel it's important to repeat from time to time, which is this notion that the Torah is called the Bible is a misleading. It's a misleading name.
It's called the scroll.
They should call it, well, I mean, it depends how you define book, right?
Uh-huh.
But the idea that the Torah is best described as a written word is a misleading idea. The actual word Torah means teaching, right? So teaching doesn't teaching is not defined as a written word. Teaching is defined as a way. Right? It's the point of it is not the medium in which it's housed, but the impact that it'll have. Right? Here. And it has far-reaching consequences. The difference between calling it the teaching and calling it the book has far-reaching consequences in the sense of how do you analyze it? How do you analyze this work, this body, this entity? So if you say it's a book, then anyone can open it up and read it. And that's the primary way that you decipher it, is simply by reading it from beginning to end. But that's not what Torah is. Torah is teaching. And actually, teaching is a fascinating idea. Like the truest place that a book is in the book. Right? That's the truest manifestation of a book is the meaning I read the book and I have my opinions on the book, but ultimately the book is a book, right? So my opinions are subjective and they may be true, they may not be true, but the truest place, the truest manifestation of a book is in the body of the written word. There may be truth even in reading the book without understanding it. Now, when it comes to Torah, to teaching, the truest place that the teaching exists is in the space between teacher and student. And that's where the teaching, there's a certain dynamism. It's a dynamic cathartic type of thing. Like what's
Transmission.
but the Torah, the teaching is like a reaction that happens in between teacher and student. Teaching is not a teaching when there's only a teacher, and teaching is not a teaching when there's only a student, and neither the teacher the teacher doesn't have a monopoly on teaching, and the student doesn't have a monopoly on the teaching. It has to exists in this liminal space between the two. For example, we have, so I quote to you two passages in Talmud. One passage says, "Im harishonim malachim nekabel mehem," that we would receive from our teachers only if they are like angels. The idea that we have to respect a teacher, that a teacher is seen as being closer to the origins of our tradition, etc. And then on the other hand, we have Kol ma shetalmid vosik osid lechadesh hakol nitan lemoshe mesinai. Anything that a what's vasik, the correct translation of the word vasik? That a legitimate student, I don't know the word, I'm struggling for the word vasik, but basically, like, the point is that the new ideas that are discovered by a student are considered to have been given at Mount Sinai. And so, in this sense, when we talk about the Torah evolving, and by evolving, I don't mean that it changes to become something different, but that there is a dynamic process that is authentically Torah. Of course, there in dynamism, in a dynamic process, we're always at the risk of leaving, of becoming something else, right? But there's a kind of there's a chemical reaction. I'm looking for physics language. That happens. That's constant. It's a living thing. And so this is then now in Torah we have two, and I think it's important to understand this also as we analyze Torah, the way it's written and the way it is and the way it's practiced. To the uninitiated, it might seem that the Torah has been watered down by rabbinic interpretation. Classic example, page 309. So this is Exodus 21, verse 24. Chapter 21, verse 24. So the Torah says that if two people fight and one person harms another, you shall give life for life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand, foot for a foot, burning for burning, wound for a wound, stripe for a stripe. Now we know that, of course, that's how it's written, and there are some cultures in which this is practiced literally. But in Judaism, this has never been practiced literally. The verse, an eye for an eye, has always, since the very beginning of Jewish practice, been interpreted to mean that a person should make financial restitution for the lost eye. Right? So the procedure would be, how do you evaluate the financial restitution of the eye? So there are 5 factors that are taken into account in making financial restitution. One is the physical damage. So you have to figure out the value, the financial value of the loss of the eye. So you take a person, figure out what is their net worth, what would be their value, their earning capacity. So in ancient times, that meant how much could they fetch on the slave market. If you would try to sell this person as a slave, how much would he be worth with two eyes? And now how much will he be worth with one eye? And the same is true also in America. Look, we do this all the time. Right, earning capacity would be a modern way of doing that. What could this person earn over a lifetime, having one eye, and how much could this person earn over a lifetime having two eyes? Right. In a standard job. Okay. That's number one. Then we take into account the cost of healing, the doctor bills. So the person who does the damage will be liable to pay for the doctor bills. The third factor is physical pain. How do you calculate the financial value of physical pain? Well, how much money could you pay a person to have this done to them? If I gave you $100, would you let me slap you in the face? No. If I gave you $500, would you let me? If I gave you 1,000, would you let me? Still no. You're shaking your head no. Huh? You wouldn't let me slap you? Not. How about 10,000? What if I offered you 100,000? Huh? That's not true. No, not for the teeth. Not the teeth. Just a slap without the teeth. I promise not to break any teeth, just for the pain. You think worst case scenario. Right? So now we start again. If I pinch you, right? How much would you, if I gave you $100, would you let me pinch you really hard? No? I would do it for $100.
She's grown, Kinahara.
Yeah, right?
You ever have that?
Yeah.
Nobody pays.
What are you afraid of with the pinch? What way? What are you afraid of?
I don't like pain.
You don't like pain? $10,000 you would do it? You would do it for 10,000. Huh? You starting to I'll tell you a story. The story is
$100 for you is cheap.
I know, but it's just a pinch. It's over in 30 seconds. You don't feel it anymore. I would do it for $100. If I could bargain up to 5,000, whatever, I would do it. But meaning, if I knew that it's a 100 deal or no deal, I would take it. Pinch me for sure. Story goes like this. FDR, maybe one of the legendary presidents. Somebody came in to try and lobby him to sign certain legislation that he was opposed to. Some kind of farm bill or something like that. And the man said to him, listen, Mr. President, in the Oval Office quietly, listen, Mr. President, I will make a contribution to your next election campaign. I'll make a contribution of $50,000 if you'll sign this legislation. He laughed and continued talking. He says, sir, this legislation is really important to me. I'm willing to double my contribution to 100,000. In those days, a lot of money. He laughs, continues talking. After a few minutes, he says, Mr. President, I'm willing to double that. I'm willing to go up even to $1 million. I'm willing to contribute $1 million to you. All of a sudden, the president got angry and threw him out of the office. He said, Mr. President, I meant no disrespect. I don't understand. Why all of a sudden are you getting angry? We were talking. I was offering you money. You said you're not for sale. Okay, fine. He says, before I wasn't for sale, but now you're getting close to my price. So I can't continue this conversation. I heard it from a reliable person. I don't know if it's true. That doesn't mean it's true. It just means I heard it from a reliable person. So in the sense that there are things that people will be willing to look. People going to work in general. Going to work is pain for which we are paid. right? We have to exert ourselves. We'd much rather sit on a beach and drink Mai Tais, right?
Not all of us, yes.
Unless you have a job you like,
Not often.
then you don't mind.
Okay, but you understand what I'm saying? Yes,
I
yes.
understand.
Okay, so some people would be willing to receive, if you get, everyone has their price. Now, of course, you have to calculate if you're talking about an older person, a younger person, a man or a woman, a person who is accustomed to pain, a person who's not accustomed to pain. All this would be factored in deciding what this pain would be valued for this person. Okay, so we have the physical damage, we have the cost of healing them, the doctor bills. That's a black and white. That's actual fees. We have the cost, the valuation of the pain. That's 4, and the 5th is emotional pain and suffering, and that's something that a person experiences, right? So, how much? uh, it's embarrassing to be hurt, so that also has a value. Emotional pain and suffering. Oh, and I forgot one. And loss of work. So the damage is in earning capacity, meaning over a lifetime, a person now will not be able to get that kind of job, but there's an actual amount of time that the person was incapacitated, for which you have to be they have to be reimbursed at minimum wage. I believe it's minimum wage only. So this is the understanding. This idea of an eye for an eye has always been understood since the very beginning of time to mean financial restitution, right? And yet the Torah writes an eye for an eye.
You made it different. People wouldn't have misinterpreted.
Right,
not to say it,
right.
But they have misinterpreted something.
So I read today, the Shalach Kadosh teaches as follows. He says the reason why the Torah
Yes.
He said the reason why the Torah writes an eye for an eye is because it's to tell us that this is the reality. That this is the reality. You have removed an eye from this person, and you are responsible to restore the eye to that person. And you have to find a way to do that. And here we understand the function of the written Torah, the function of the actual Bible, right? Which, of course, the Torah is, in part, a book. But the totality of Torah is not a book. The book is a component. Part of the teaching, and this is the part of the teaching which is written in the Torah, in the book, is designed to reflect not what you're supposed to do, but what the reality is. There's a difference between.
It reminds me of here on the radio, they're finding the perpetrators of child abuse in the Boy Scouts. Now,
Yeah.
Every week is somebody, another group. How do they compensate all these
Right.
people that were hurt and suffered over years?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's, where's the eye for eye there?
Right. Absolutely.
And also, how do they prove it? It's not easy. So many years later.
Yeah.
How do you compensate somebody who's
No, I mean,
emotionally damaged?
So you're talking about these are the obstacles, the challenges in applying, and exactly you're really highlighting the issue that I'm bringing out here, which is that there are two components to this procedure. One component is identifying the fact, identifying what is the actual reality here. And then there is the practical consideration, which is what will we do about it? What can be done about it? In the sense, therefore there are two components to Torah. There is the essential Torah and the utilitarian Torah. What the true Torah, which is not utilitarian, meaning a Jew has to know, a student of Torah has to know that when a person, they have to be aware that when a person takes out another person's eye, that they've taken their eye and they owe them an eye. Meaning they have removed the capacity. They've removed a certain capacity, not only from this person, but from the universe. And they are now obligated to set themselves towards restoring that capacity to the universe and to this person. Right. And even if it's not possible, they have to know that this is the reality. So a book, going back to the idea of the book, the purpose of a book is to be there. When we read the book, we take it into our universe. And so in Jewish teaching, we have the Deoraita and the Derabanan. We have the rabbinic law and we have the biblical law. The biblical law, the book law, which of course Oraita means teaching also, but that's another story. The biblical law is not always practiced.
Literally.
Right. So I don't mean that. What I mean to say is, so there's a number of ways in the way that manifests. So, for example, I would say that the eye for an eye is not. I would not characterize the words "an eye for an eye" taking out another person's eye because they took out someone else's eye, right? That's not the biblical law. The biblical law is to make financial restitution because that's what the text means and has always meant. The words of the text have a meaning to themselves that are not practiced. Okay, that's point one. Another example of a way in which biblical law is not practiced, for example, the death penalty, right? The death penalty in the Torah is not practiced.
I thought they stoned people and they never did.
It's
Never
certainly today it's not practiced, and it hasn't been practiced. It wasn't practiced in Second Temple times. It's not. And if following Jewish tradition, the death penalty is practically impossible to administer. We're talking about biblical law, not Israeli law. One has nothing to do with the other. When the Bible says that somebody who curses their parent shall surely die, right? Or one who wounds their parent shall surely die. That means you execute someone for wounding their parent. The procedure requires that two witnesses observe it, this is also here in the text. 2 witnesses observe it, and that they warn the person that what they're doing is a capital offense, and the person has to indicate, I understand what you're telling me, and I understand that I'm about to do something which is a capital offense, and I'm doing it anyways, knowing that I will be executed for doing this. And it has to happen all within the span of a few seconds. If there's any delay between the warning and the action, then the warning is not considered viable. So that's one example of a way in which technically it isn't, when it says the person shall surely die, it doesn't actually ever happen. Rabbi Akiva said that a court that executes more than once in 70 years is bloodthirsty. Another example is imprisonment. There is almost no reference to anyone being imprisoned in biblical law. However, there have been prisons in Jewish history, and prison is an important part of a humane criminal justice society. We have to be able to lock people up sometimes. How long that should be is another question. But there are times where a person needs to be separated from society. The alternative is either killing them, which may not be legal, or letting them continue to act with impunity, which is also cruel. Right. And it's cruel to the person themselves, because the person themselves doesn't want to be, meaning there's a part of the person, when you talk about Jewish mysticism, every person who's doing a sin is partially against it. They're going against themselves, right? So if a person is harming themselves and you tie them up, to not tie up a person who's harming himself is cruel to the person themselves, right? Right. You if somebody wants to hit himself, if somebody wants to hurt himself, and you tie him up, you're being cruel or you're being kind, right? You're being kind. If you have compassion, you'll tie the person up. If you say, no, let the person do what they want, that's cruel, right? Okay, so Jewish communities have had prisons, but the Torah doesn't say to have prison. There's no teaching about prison here.
That's a good question. I always have that question of when they lock people up, how do they decide 5 years, 6 years? What's the difference between 5 and 6 years?
It's a good question. It's a very good question. And that, by the way, it goes back to this principle, the difference between the book and the teaching. So practically speaking, a person, we gave 2 examples, right? One example is that the death penalty is written in the Torah, but it's not practiced. And this doesn't mean that it's taken, that we don't take it literally. When the Torah says he shall surely die, it means he shall be put to death in most cases. But the teaching that goes along with that is that it is impractical to do it. So why then would it be written if it's not going to be actually done? And the answer is because the purpose of the book is to tell you what the reality is. And the reality is that this sin is so severe that it goes to the heart of the meaning of life itself. And if your life doesn't include this principle, this value, then you are mischayev benafsho. You are invalidating the very essence of your own life. So, for example, a person who wounds his parents or who curses his parents is repudiating his own life source. He has to recognize, meaning your parents gave you physical life, and you have to recognize that as much as the Torah never says love your parents, right? Because that's the Torah that says love God. Torah doesn't say love your parents. The Torah says honor your parents, because you have to recognize that your life comes from your parents. And as much as you value, because the Torah requires that we value our own life, and part of that includes valuing the one who gave me life, and that means honoring God and honoring my parents. And so by challenging, by violating the physical integrity of my parents with a wound, or by violating the spiritual integrity of my parents with an emotional or spiritual wound, I am violating the integrity of my own life. So therefore, again, the Torah is writing this to tell me what the nature of reality is, and then what I'm going to do about that is another important part of Jewish tradition, which is the rabbinic. I don't want to say interpretation, because that has misleading connotations, but I want to say the rabbinic implementation of Jewish teaching. The implementation of Jewish teaching may not fully reflect the reality because it's impractical. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't know that this is the reality that I am striving to manifest. And this is the interplay between teacher and student, between reader and book, between Bible and the teaching. Another example of the impracticality of biblical teaching is the fence around the Torah. So there are biblical laws that the Torah says thou shalt not do, but that we practically would never. Of course, we don't do it, but we've developed prohibitions around it, so that you never come close to that actual act. So, I guess the simplest example is when it comes to the Sabbath prohibitions. So, writing is something that's prohibited on the Sabbath, on Shabbos. And the prohibition there is engaging in using human faculties in order to engage in the creative process, not in the creative process, but in a creative act, in the act of creating something. Now, the biblical prohibition is to write 2 letters, because less than 2 letters is not an actual creation. No word in Hebrew consists of less than 2 letters. And therefore, 1 letter alone or 1 mark alone is not a letter, is not a word, there's no creation there. It's just a meaningless mark. It doesn't have the significance of a created thing. Meaning, you have to get out of our thinking of what Shabbos is and how we observe Shabbos, because this is the point I'm making, is that our practical observance of Shabbos has a different spirit to it because of the way we implement the biblical law. But you have to understand that at the core of what the biblical law is the prohibition against engaging in a creative act. Now, this, by the way, all of the biblical prohibitions, basically, all the biblical prohibitions of Shabbos could not be done by an animal. They're all human, particularly human acts that engage in creating something. So they involve cooking, they involve making of clothing, making books, and cultivating land and growing produce. Those are the general categories of the Shabbat, the categories of the categories. Meaning, it is how we improve upon the world that God gave us and continue the process of creation. But there has to be an entity, a new entity that results, or a critical change that results through our act. Thus, an animal makes markings, but an animal never writes 2 letters that mean something. And so if a person makes markings, the practical observance of Shabbos prohibits the making of any markings. But the reality is that that's not what's prohibited on Shabbos by the Bible, by the Doraita. The Doraita, the biblical prohibition of Shabbos is only to write 2 letters and only with the right hand. If you write it with the left hand, it's not a Doraita. Because by writing with the left hand, you are not fully engaged in the creative process. If you're left-handed, then that's called your right hand in Jewish teaching. Yamin shalosh hu small kol adam. In halachic literature, our left-handed person is called his right hand, which is everyone else's left hand.
So they would have to use their right hand to be considered.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. And so the spirit, so the spirit of the law, and by the spirit of the law, I mean the actual, it's kind of the spirit of the law is technical, and the implementation of the law is spiritual. Yeah? No, the spirit of the law is technical. What is the reality here? And the manifestation of the law, what we would think of as the technical law, is not the spirit of the law, it's the letter of the law. The letter of the law is technical, right? The technical is the letter of the law, what we actually do. Anyway, I'm just talking around in circles. But what I'm trying to say, so therefore, but when I say to you that it's permitted to write on Shabbos, you shake your head. Oh, no, Rabbi, you're wrong. Of course, because our understanding of Shabbos is not the biblical prohibition. Our understanding of Shabbos is our manifestation, our implementation of that law, which it prohibits even the picking up of a pen. But by the biblical law, there's no prohibition against picking up a pen because you haven't created anything yet. But so then why do we need to know what the biblical law is if we never do that? If that in no way reflects our observance of Shabbos? Because we want you to understand, the Torah wants that we should understand what is the divine reality that we are aspiring to live in harmony with, which again, in the human world, that'll involve doing, like in the real world, that'll involve doing a lot of irrelevant things that are all centered towards reaching that goal. And by the way, those irrelevant things may change in time and place. Going back to the question of imprisonment, and you asked the question, how do we know whether to sentence somebody by 5 years or by 6 years? So the Torah doesn't say thou shalt imprison a person when they do a specific sin, because the reality is there's no divine reality that involves incapacitating a person. There's no middle ground. Either you're in divine reality, a person is either alive and therefore expected to be serving God as a free person, or the person is dead. As a matter of fact, if you look at elsewhere in the Torah, it says, you shall see, I place before you blessing and curse. The blessing is the teaching, the Torah, the teaching, the obligations, and the prohibitions that I teach you. And the curse is if you don't listen. You shall choose life. I place before you life and death. You shall choose life. And so not living as a free person doing these activities is a meaningless life, which is death. In divine reality, not fulfilling the Torah is death. And life means that a person must be allowed to make choices in order to fulfill the Torah. And therefore, to lock a person up is not a biblical reality. It's not a divine reality, because you're incapacitating the person, essentially. However, the practical realities of the world sometimes require that as we live in this imperfect reality, that we have to kind of approximate towards something in order to bring ourselves in harmony with the divine reality. And so sometimes we might have to do something that isn't 100% true. We have to approximate in order to work on the reality, to get where we have to get to. So what I mean to say is, in biblical reality, it would be very specific and clear. There's no approximation in biblical reality, because reality is only a reality. It's black and white. It's mathematical. Whereas in the human implementation of that reality, there will be some approximation involved, because we are trying to approximate, we're trying to work towards living in harmony with this divine reality. And so therefore, since in the black and white biblical reality, a person is not a person, life means that a person should be free. So there's the person should be free. Now, however, we have to work towards that. Today, in this moment, we're not able to fully manifest that reality, because if we're going to let this person be free, they're going to die, right? They're going to be in a state of death. If we let this person act as they will, they'll do things that will be death. They'll sin, right? And therefore, to save this person's life, we have to lock them up spiritually, right? This is essentially the meaning of imprisonment today, yes? But now we're in the human realm. And a human cannot specify exactly this. The human realm doesn't lend itself to that kind of specificity, because we don't know reality. And therefore we have to approximate. Understand what I'm saying? So this is the unfortunate reality, that we have to approximate. Okay? And the last example I want to give is the example of Tikkun Olam. Tikkun Olam are the biblical enactments that are established for the well-function of society, and Tikkun Olam, by the way. So of course, I have to point out that Tikkun Olam in the modern lingo is not the original meaning of the word Tikkun Olam, right? Right? Rehab. Tikkun Olam is rehab. Rehabilitation. Tikkun Olam generally today is taken to mean social justice, right? Like climate, right? Like protecting the climate, or giving what we would call in classical Jewish teaching tzedakah, right? Being charitable is called Tikkun Olam. So traditional Jews bristle against that interpretation, because tzedakah is biblical. It's a divine reality. If I have more than you have, it means justice, righteousness, what is not going beyond the letter of the law. It's the letter of the law that I have to give my extra money to somebody else. because the money doesn't belong to me. It's only entrusted to me.
What's extra money?
Okay, so then we enter into the human world of approximation.
But you don't know what the future is.
So we enter into the human world of approximation,
Like you said before.
right? So then, but we have to understand that the divine reality is that the money that God gave me, that's mine, is only the money that I need. What I don't need is not mine, and I have to give that away. Right. So social, meaning in a sense, yes. The difference between, and this is again the difference between biblical law is not practical. But at the same time, we have to aspire to it and we have to approximate ourselves toward it. And in our understanding, that means tzedakah, right? There was a time when people thought that wealth was divinely ordained and poverty was divinely ordained. It's a revolutionary idea. If wealth is divinely ordained, then I have more, it's mine. And as a matter of fact, it's going against God to give away my money because God gave it to me, not to you. So Torah tells us give tzedakah. It's because it's that person's money. I lost my train of thought. So Tikkun Olam, right? So tzedakah is not Tikkun Olam. Tikkun Olam is when the Torah says something is not required, and the rabbi or the Torah either by omission or explicitly, and the rabbis make an enactment in order to because society needs it. Classic example is the Prose Bowl. Prose Bowl is a the Bible says that in the 7th year, in the sabbatical year, all loans are forgiven, and this is impractical. So there is a loophole, which is that private law. Well, it's not a loophole. It's meaning the law, the biblical law contains this caveat that the loans that are forgiven in the 7th sabbatical year are privately held loans. But loans that are publicly held, where a person owes money to the community, or to the court, or to a corporation, let's say, where the loan has been ratified by a court, sort of given to the trust of the court, registered with the court, then that loan is not forgiven in the 7th year. And so so technically a person could do a Prose Bowl. A person could go and register their loan with the court, and then it would survive the sabbatical year. The Tikkun Olam, the rabbinical enactment is that every loan automatically survives the 7th year. And what the legal devices that they use legitimate legal devices, but the point is that they made this rabbinic enactment in order to contravene the biblical law. Because, so again, why is the biblical law there? Yeah. Biblical law is to tell you that there's a divine reality in which on the Sabbath, the 7th day and the 7th year, all things are restored to their origins. And everything goes back to its source. And everything, it's a day of truth in which what's mine is truly mine. And what's yours is yours and what's truly yours. And what that means is that everything truly belongs to God. And that's why we don't create on the Sabbath. And that's why on the 7th year, we don't work our fields. Because we are in a state of perfect being. We're no longer participating in the act of creation. And that involves, on an agricultural level, it involves not working the fields. And on an economy level, it involves everything being restored to its original owner. And so that's a divine reality that we have to be aware of. The human implementation of that idea requires sometimes some takanos, some concessions to human reality. That is a a rabbinic enactment. And it represents the human effort to strive towards living in harmony with the divine reality. And this is the difference between a Doraita and a Darabanan, between a rabbinic law and a biblical law. Between the book, the text, and the teaching. And so we have to know what reality is. So part of Judaism is to know what reality is, but at the same time, to understand that the human physical world is a world of falsehood. It's a world in which reality is not apparent. Things are not seen in black and white. And therefore, the only way for us to come close to reality is to approximate things. And that's the teaching. That's the teaching. So it incorporates these two elements.
It sounds a little like Plato's image of the cave. Reality just being a reflection. I mean, what we see is just a reflection of reality.
Yes, so we think it's reality, but it's not real. In Plato's cave, the people in the cave think that that's reality.
Yeah.
But they're only seeing a reflection of the reality. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
This also explains, by the way, some of the laws that seem, kind of, why are we still studying this? Because while it may not be practical in today's day and age, there is a teaching about reality that's in this law.
Okay.